To focus on the other side of the border, the north of our border right now, where the president is looking at a tariff on Canadian lumber, but it is looking like a trade war to some Canadians. Jeff Locke with the latest on that. Jeff.
Speaking of negotiating tactics, maybe that's what's going on here, Neil. Indeed, we spent yesterday with those dairy farmers that are kind of getting screwed by Canada and the shutdown to the Canadian market for U.S. producers. Well, the president struck back. Take a look at the presidential tweet this morning. He said Canada's made business for our dairy farmers in Wisconsin and other border states very difficult, like New York as well, not just Wisconsin. Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump on the same side of that issue. He says, we will not stand for this. Watch. Well, what they're watching right now is a 20% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber. What the heck is that? Well, if you go into Home Depot, buy yourself a 2x4, that would be Canadian softwood lumber, more likely than not, because a lot of it comes from Canada. The tariff would be retroactive to 90 days, which would get a little extra sting to Canada for it, and it would be to offset the subsidies the U.S. government says Canada puts on its lumber. Here's how that works. In Canada, most of the lumber is logged from forests that are owned by the provinces. They give the Canadian loggers kind of a break on the cost. Here in the U.S., lumber companies often own the land themselves, and if they pay for government lands to log on government lands, they don't get really much of a break on it. And so they're trying to level the playing field if they can. Now, here's the interesting thing in terms of the markets, Neil. The market's doing just the exact opposite you would expect. Lumber futures at the CME today are limit down. You'd expect them to be up over this. And Canadian lumber companies, look at the stocks today. They're actually way up. That's because the Canadians apparently were expecting this to be even worse. In terms of who else thinks it's bad, in addition to Canada, that would be U.S. home builders. The NAHB today coming out against this move by the president and pointing to a study that they did some years ago on a 15% tariff. This will be 20 now. The study said that it would result in a 4.2% increase in home prices. It would lose 4,500 construction jobs building new homes, and those guys would lose about $265 million in wages. They obviously don't like it. They like cheap lumber. But, you know, the tree huggers also would say, cut the logs down in Canada. Don't cut them down in the U.S.
You know, it's something the Canadian press is going nuts over this. They hate this whole thing. So it's interesting where vantage point you take on this.
But you know, those poor, I got to tell you, those poor dairy guys that we were with yesterday, this is kind of another shot in the trade war, but those guys are still having to dump their milk because the Canadian market is shut down to them. They're still getting screwed. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
$10 milk at the rate we're going here. All right, very good having you on again, my friend. All right.